Hello, and welcome to the Sunny Book Nook. Today, I have for you some lesbian movies and lesbian book recommendations. So for every lesbian movie I'm going to be mentioning in this video, I'm going to be recommending a book that reminds me of said movie. To be honest, I tried to film this like a month ago, or not even, like a couple weeks ago, and the audio didn't record. So, bummer, but here we are again, and it's, fucking take two. I have my list over here, and let's just go through it. I also am going to be making this a multiple part series as I continue reading sapphic books as they are released and as I continue watching lesbian movies. So, stay tuned, subscribe if you haven't already, etc. Okay, the first movie I'm going to be talking about. It's an iconic one. It's one you can watch for free on YouTube, but I'm a Cheerleader, 1999, directed by Jamie Babbitt, I believe. This movie is a cult classic, campy as hell. It's like campy, but also about conversion therapy camp. Just like campy camp. We're following Natasha Lyonne as a teenage cheerleader getting shipped off to a conversion therapy program run by RuPaul, in which she falls in love with an emo goth chick, and it's a really, really sweet and cute coming of age story that is hilarious while still being deeply touching. And because of all of those elements, I want to recommend We Ride Upon Sticks by Quan Berry for But I'm a Cheerleader enjoyers. We Ride Upon Sticks is similar in tone, I think, and it's also set in like the 90s. The vibes of But I'm a Cheerleader, very 80s, very 90s, and this book is also very 80s, very 90s. And we're also following a bunch of different teenagers who are all kind of quirky, which we see a quirky cast of gay teenagers in But I'm a Cheerleader as well. And that's a parallel that makes me think of these two pieces of media in conjunction with each other. This book also has some sapphic plot points, but it's not the main driving feature of the story the way that the romance plot line between the two main characters is in But I'm a Cheerleader. But I think that the campy tone is what really makes them feel similar to me, as well as the era setting and the humor and the sense of teenagehood and adolescence and the awkwardness of that, I think, is really fully embodied in this book the way that it is embodied in But I'm a Cheerleader, which is a really fun movie that everyone has seen. If you haven't seen it, you need to go see it. So that is my first movie book pairing recommendation. Next, we have a more indie film. Well, technically, But I'm a Cheerleader is an indie film because it was produced independently, because it's like, a lesbian rom-com made in 1999. So, Anyway, so we have a 2020 indie studio release called Kajillionaire, and this movie me and my podcast co-host Renaissance talked about on our lesbian comedy commentary podcast, media commentary podcast, Lavender Menace, a while back, and we watched it together, and it was such a phenomenal movie, and it was really about this unconventional and unhealthy, but in a very strange way, family dynamic, in a very specific situation in which, they're navigating poverty in LA by being scammers. It's set in contemporary days. It's following a main character who is named Old Dolio, who is very, very repressed, uncomfortable, and awkward, and follows her and her two parents, who they're all scammers, that's how they get by, run into this really cheerful, bubbly young woman played by Gina Rodriguez on this plane ride, and she sort of gets looped into the craziness. It is a really slow kind of and quiet movie that is still very deeply moving. And because of that, and of course it's lesbian, because the bubbly girl and then Old Dolio, in navigating the toxic family dynamic and their day-to-day lives, they end up sort of falling for each other. Their intimacy feels almost inevitable, but also very deeply strange. And a book that I want to recommend in conjunction with Kajillionaire is Pizza Girl by Jean Kyung Fraser. This is a book following an 18-year-old pregnant pizza delivery girl in LA, and her father recently died due to alcohol abuse, and her mother is a Korean immigrant, her dad's white, and they have sort of a tough relationship despite her mother being deeply loving and tender. And our main character also has a tough relationship with her boyfriend and baby daddy. Basically, they all live in like the same house together. It's like a really interesting, unconventional situation, family dynamic situation. And she ends up getting really obsessed with this like middle-aged housewife mom who orders a particular kind of pizza every like Wednesday. It's about her increasing obsession with this woman, as well as our main character navigating substance abuse and alcoholism and this strained and difficult relationship with her family and her boyfriend. So I think that this book very much gives me Kajillionaire vibes because tonally they're very similar. And the setting, again, it's like both LA, and it's both these unconventional families and struggling with money in this city. Both of these pieces of media are somewhat like esoteric, I guess, but because of that, I think they go really well together, and if you like one, you will like the other. The next movie book pairing I have for you is a movie that I think is available on Hulu. It's another indie movie that came out in 2017 called Princess Sid. I really think this movie encapsulates this like bisexual sapphic coming of age trauma and grief sort of story in a summer in a out of town with a older family member really, really well. And it's kind of quiet and slow and not much happens, but so much happens. It's a lot about the inner world and the relationships and the quiet sort of day-to-day realities of being this like teenage girl who's kind of dealing with a lot, because in Princess Sid, I think our main character, Sid's mom, who is an author, had recently passed, and she's spending the summer at, I think, her aunt's house in Chicago, I believe. So the book that I want to recommend in association with this movie is The Last True Poets of the Sea by Julia Drake. This book is about a young bisexual girl who goes to live with her uncle over the summer after her brother was sent to the psychiatric hospital, I think, after attempting suicide. And it's about her sort of working, so she ends up working at this aquarium in Maine, in the small town that she's living in, but she has this mission to find this boat that her like grandmother came on that sunk, but she was the only survivor. Basically, she's like trying to uncover her family history in that way, but she's also dealing with the trauma of her family situation and navigating her own sort of self-destructiveness, and like there's a sort of a bit of a bisexual love triangle in here. And a lot of these things feel very similar to what happens in Princess Sid, because again, the setup of like going to a small town to stay with a family member because something traumatic happened or something traumatic in your family is going on. Very similar, and I think tonally, again, very similar stories. They're very much slow moving coming of age stories where not much happens but so much happens, and our characters' desires are really difficult to muddle out, and for them themselves and for us as the viewer / reader as well. And again, it's like these teenage bisexual girls who slay and their awkwardness and like insecurities, but also how they like end up getting with all these different people, but like in like a young adult friendly sort of way, because this is a YA novel, and Princess Sid, I think it's probably like PG-13 like at best. So now to move on to books that I don't physically own, or I do physically own but someone else is borrowing right now, / I gave it away. And this movie is another indie movie released in 1996 called The Watermelon Woman. This is a movie that me and Renaissance, my podcast co-host, discuss on Patreon, actually, in a bonus episode. Anyways, so The Watermelon Woman is a classic Black lesbian film set in Philly, and our main character works at a film rental place, and she is like a butch lesbian. She gets into a relationship with one of the customers at the store, and she's also in the middle of trying to make a documentary about a person that she sees in these old, like, 1930s films. It's like a movie within a movie within a movie. It's like a movie about a movie about a movie. It's very, very interesting. It's very lighthearted. It's a rom-com and joyous and funny, and it's really, really sweet. So the book that I want to recommend to viewers of The Watermelon Woman is The Days of Aphrodite by Asali Solomon. This book is also, like, fucking hilarious, but also there are moments of melancholy and there are more serious issues going on in the book. It's also set in Philly, and we're following our main character, who is a Black lesbian, but she later in life marries a white man and has a son, and so there's a very interesting dynamic going on here. Also, one of the characters in The Watermelon Woman is a Bryn Mawr student, and our main character in The Days of Aphrodite is a Bryn Mawr graduate, and we sort of alternate timelines between her being at college, being like a dyke, really involved in the lesbian scene at Bryn Mawr and like in Philly, to her being sort of a middle-aged woman whose husband tried to run for office and is getting possibly indicted by the FBI. So, and we're following her trying to do a dinner party with all of her friends, and it's a really interesting sort of book that is doing a lot in terms of exploring race, identity, class, gender, sexuality, and I think that tonally these two pieces of media are not that similar, but in terms of the content of like who the main character is and where the setting is and these little details, those are what made me connect these two stories together, and I think that if you like one, you might appreciate the other. And finally, this might be my favorite comparison, and I just now thought of it, and I didn't have this on my original list, but like, bro, you know the 2018 Yorgos Lanthimos, I don't know how to say his name, film The Favourite? This movie is, if you don't know, about the gay Queen of England in like the 18th century or whatever, and her having these two like maids who like battle for dominance through lesbian sex, and there's this court politic. It's funny, but it's a lesbian period piece with a very strange and unsettling sort of element to it, and it's about ambition, and it's about the things that you will do to get to a place of power. And a book that really makes me think of that is Matrix by Lauren Groff, which is set in, I think, 14th or 13th century France, where our main character gets sent away to this convent, and she climbs the ranks of power very, very quickly. She gets sent there as a young girl because she gets caught basically like being kind of gay with the queen. Well, that's not because. The reason why is because she's seen as like ugly and too big and too broad and too, like, she's not marriage material. She's kind of the bastardess child as well of one of the court people in the Versailles palace, you know what I mean? So she gets sent off to this like nunnery, and there she ends up accumulating a lot of power and control on a spiritual and material level, and she still maintains her relationship with the queen, whom they were girlhood friends together, and lesbian activities ensued, and their relationship is marked through letters and stuff across time, and the book sort of follows our main character's rise to power as like a too tall 14-year-old to like a very, very well-known all-female spiritual leader. She ends up reconnecting with the queen, her childhood bestie, and yeah, it is very similar, I think, in tone and in message, and almost not so much like plot, but like setting wise and vibe wise, these two pieces of media are very similar to me, and I think that if you liked one, you will very much enjoy the other. And also, The Favorite is a really good movie. It's like one of my favorites, I would say. I saw it in theaters and it was amazing. And Matrix by Lauren Groff was so good. Such a fascinating read. I think it might have been on my top 20 list of 2021 reads. So good. They both deal with themes of like political and religious power, which are intrinsically tied in Europe in these time periods, as well as women in positions of power and like female agency within the limitations of these worlds. So, okay, those are all of my lesbian movies and lesbian book or sapphic movie and sapphic books, women loving women, whatever, pairings and recommendations. Let me know if any of these like make sense to you or if they don't make sense to you, and if you've seen any of these movies or read any of these books, you know, what you think. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, you know, all that bullshit. I will see you in my next video, I guess. Bye.